next one is demonstrates. Okay, we're gonna record. Sounds good.
Yeah, I went back to the recording because this is interesting stuff, and it looks like somebody stopped the original recording.
Yeah, I think Stefan left. That's why it stopped.
Maybe.
But anyway, okay. So the next one is demonstrate superiority. Like I'm so freaking good, and so I'm going to complain about something. The final one, so the demonstrate superiority. The classic example there would be a foodie. Right? Oh, this wine isn't fruity, or it has too many whatevers, right? So you're trying to tell someone that you're so good, so you complain about the wine or the beverage. Yeah. One of the other ones here is expressing good fortune. So it's not really a complaint. And an example, I actually had a colleague back when I was a PhD, she got a job at London Business School, and she would always complain about how expensive the apartments were, you know, around London Business School. And I'm like, what? You know, it's like, if I had that problem, I would be happy, right? And so that's the kind of complaining. This one is expressing good fortune. The next one is about getting back or getting feedback or confirming understanding. So you're actually doing it as a diagnostic tool. So you complain about something, and if someone agrees with you, then you're kind of confirming your opinion. And if they don't agree with you, then you can sort of check in and say, oh, maybe something's wrong with what I've said. So there's different approach there. We actually talked in a previous meeting about a cathartic release. So I need to emotionally express my stuff to get it out. And so maybe I feel emotionally better. And then finally, the one I mentioned to you earlier today was kind of an icebreaker, where I complain about something that's irrelevant so we can have kind of a common ground or a sort of a bonding experience. And so those are the types or reasons why people complain. And I actually, in review for this meeting, I tried to figure out, well, what were the outcomes? But the red one I couldn't remember, and I didn't have time to check my notes, so I can't tell you what that one is. But the rest of them are pretty clear. So if I complain, it'll lead to more complaining. And there was discussion in the literature about cycles of complaining, not only in terms of frequency, but also intensity. So I think in the qualitative data that we've had, we can actually trace that because we have it over time, right? So that would be a cool thing to show. The other thing is internalizing a complaint. So if I say something, it goes back to, I was thinking about this when it goes back to what Wyke was saying about sense making. If you know Wyke, he says, I don't know what I think until I see what I say. That's basically what's happening here. I say it, and then I say, oh, I must be angry, or you know, that must be dissatisfying in some way. Then we have, okay, so improved cathartic release, we had that. And then we have an assess of a relationship. So for example, if I complain about you and then you change to meet my complaint, now I know I have a fairly strong connection with you. So it's another type of diagnostic tool. So then we have other people, the changes in other people. So you could actually solve the problem. I could complain to the person who's creating a harm, and then I could solve that problem. I don't know what the socialized one is. I have to check that, like I said.
Could be basically connection, like socialized, you know, we share something that is perhaps slightly unethical, you know, and then it kind of makes us more socially connected. Right?
Could be. Maybe that's the icebreaker kind of thing, but in another way,
like,
could be.
Yeah, like if I approach you and start saying something that we normally don't discuss, and you turn around, I'm like, okay, well, but then and you say, oh yeah, that's interesting, let me tell you something. And then so like that sort of gossip, you know, maybe that's what they meant.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check on that. I couldn't remember. Reciprocal complaining is the person complains like it's like a frequency thing, but the other person gets involved. And then the other one is kind of a trust building exercise where I complain about something, and now you know what I feel like. So I've disclosed some secret to you, if you will. And so there's a lot, basically there's a lot going on here. And maybe these types of categories can help the qualitative team code the comments.
And yeah, that's my question immediately. This is fascinating, but then is it something we can capture with our existing data? Like what kind of complaining was that? And then would every type be reported? Like, for example, if it's something, you know, trust building, for example, as you said.
No.
Or maybe socializing. So those seem to be more of a sort of positive type of complaining, or at least, you know, could be. And in that case, maybe that's not something that can make into our comments or comments to the professor for that matter. So I wonder if we can only capture the bad stuff.
Well,
based on what I've learned,
Go ahead, Lanju.
I mean,
Go
based
ahead.
on what I've read, I think this is very, very comprehensive structure and very interesting. And based on what I've read, just a few hundred of comments, I can see most of them, not all of them, but most of them we can find supportive comments from students.
So based on the data? Yeah,
Based on
that's
comments.
great.
One thing I just want to add is, since we are focusing on global virtual teams, are there any GVT specific complaining? This could be a contribution from, if we were to do a quantitative study, that will be a contribution. What are the
That's a
GVT
very-
specific?
First that comes to mind is the time zone. That's something that
Yeah,
people complain about.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very, so in terms of the big categories, I guess it may still fall into one of these ones, but maybe, yes, maybe there is something related specifically to,
But something, so just as a quick note, something that we were kind of missing that I think I may have found in this reading is a crisp or a more crisp or focused definition of complaining, which is at the top of the sheet here. And it's expressing dissatisfaction whereby the current or future state is less than some standard.
Mhm.
This is exactly the same definition I used when I read the comments. I found it in a dictionary.
The first time I see a definition to be so mathematical, like even with yeah. But so going back to our original comment, so all right, so let's say there are different types of complaining or different purposes for complaining. So how does it inform us in terms of, so are we then arguing, and it seems like we are, that depending on the type of complaining, it may be good or bad for the team? Or are we trying to use it in some other way? Like, are we saying that, for example, if we have this type of complaining, then the team will be happier and perform better? And if we have that type of complaining, then it will lead to climate damage and poor performance? Or is it something else that we're trying to use it for?
Well, I think we can look, I mean,
It depends on the.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Langu.
Oh, just one quick thought. It depends on how we come up with the code scheme. If we can trying to come up with some predictors, or the purpose is to find out how to improve constructive complaining, how to decrease destructive complaining. Then we can come up with some predictors and draw some lines using in vivo, and we can use cross validation, cross checking, and see how many. What other predictors can lead to constructive, and then same thing for outcome.
Mm-hmm. Maybe even in terms of who complains, well, maybe this kind of people complain this way, maybe for building trust, and people with very different characteristics make this sort of complaints. Sorry, Bob, yeah, we interrupted you.
No, that's fine. I mean, I was just thinking, yeah, at the team level, we can look at what impact complaining has on the team dynamics, team performance, team morale. At the individual level, like you're saying, some antecedents of complaining or some consequences of complaining, maybe tied into peer review too. I mean, those who complain a lot, do they get better or worse reviews from their peers? So the other thing, I just did a quick kind of pop research review just through some Google searches on toxic employee or toxic team members, and there are a lot of different people are talking about trust and about complaining. Complaining is one of the elements in that of a toxic team member or of a toxic team. I mean, those are some other angles.
But I think, again, there's some assumptions as to the content and the target and of the complaining. Because if I'm using an icebreaker complaint, it's not toxic, right?
No, right. And I like how, especially how both you, Justin, and Longju categorize that as it's good complaining and there's bad complaining. So there's constructive and destructive kinds of complaints.
Mm-hmm.
And another thought I have if we can use quantitative data to test our theory. For example, if we have one code saying that a lot of people complaining about plagiarism, and then we check whether that complaint behavior works or not. So we use longitudinal data. So week 4, they complain about plagiarism. Does that change or improve in week 5? Or complain about team norm, does it change, get better in team 5?
Actually, most of those could be, yeah, like for example, free writing. You said that it's
Right.
one of the most common. So if there are complaints in week 2, 3, 4, and we may even know who the person is, we can look if the performance improves of that person, if the free writer starts, performing or not. So same thing if there is a complaint about maybe conflicts. Again, we have conflict frequency week by week and comments week by week. So again,
So
potentially we can.
here's go ahead, Sharon.
Bob mentioned the words that were echoing in my mind throughout this conversation is the constructive feedback that you can do something with. So, and I don't see it really represented here. It doesn't mean that it's not there, but I just don't see it very clearly represented as opportunities for growth. Not that it's a horrible thing. It's just an opportunity for us to make process improvements, team gelling improvements. Is that captured in these categories, Justin?
Well, it's the first one under implied goal. It's called instrumental improvement / constructive.
Okay, so that would, oh, I didn't see the constructive. I've no idea. My eyes, sorry.
That's not bad. No
I was looking at all the others.
problem.
Okay, so the instrumental improvement and constructive, it would then be really neat to see, is it toward X culture or is it toward the team member?
So this is a very good point, like about what are we complaining? And I think what might be I'm asking this as a question, so I'm not making statements. Would a good way forward actually to blend these two approaches? Because I think before we were talking about sort of doing a new sample, collecting new data, and the other one is another group doing qualitative work. Could we merge them such that we have a coding scheme, this compared with Longju, compared with other ideas or whatever, and then I think Longju may have suggested this, use quantitative data to predict what types of teams have cycles of complaints or what type of people, whatever, complaining this about complaining that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Because I think our answer is actually in the qualitative part. And I think that's why I guess I'm a little bit biased towards, hard quality kind of work than most. But I think if we're going to try and do a top tier kind of paper, we need the richness that we're not having in our current data set, right? So we have to create that.
We also need to be really careful about our qualitative methods. I mean, it's great the work that Longju did, but we need to be very organized, having multiple multi-rater reliabilities and all of that, and very tight definitions for the coding that we adhere to.
It may still be a good idea to more clearly define the sort of the question and the method of the paper. So I'm not sure if we need to go back to those original 8 ideas that we had for papers and see if any of them could be completed using these data and these methodologies that we discussed in the last half an hour. Or would it be a whole new paper? But if it's a whole new paper, again, it may be a good idea to more clearly specify the research question, the hypothesis, the sort of the narrative. Because again, it seems to me like we're getting into some interesting stuff here, but it almost looks like it's distinct from what we discussed before and much more complicated, which is good. So it's not a problem. But then we need to decide that, okay, we're dropping those ideas, we are pursuing this one, because if we keep doing this exploration without a direction, we may spend another many weeks and coming up with.
So at least conceptually for me, this is quite a good week or a couple of days work, because it much more clarified to me the nuance that is complaining. And we really didn't capture that before.
True.
Right?
And if we tried to go to a top journal with what we had without, knowing of all these literatures, somebody would say, oh, wait a second, guys. And then like all the way back in 1996, Kowalski, like what you're trying to do, that's reinventing the bicycle. And yours has only one wheel so far.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do we want to then proceed in terms of the next steps? Are there any tasks that we need still to complete to sort of feel more comfortable about the content and the construct itself, or are we ready to start thinking about the papers? What
I like
mean
the
by-
comments.
Yeah, I
Oh.
thought about reading some more comments, but I'm not sure how much more marginal utility it will sort of present. Anything else that you guys plan to do so that we can say, okay, let's keep doing it until the next week, or are we ready for some new tasks? Like Justin, this stuff that you found, so that's a completed step, or there is still something to do in that direction?
So I'm actually fairly confident that at least Kowalski's work, I'm up to date on it, and Kowalski, if that's the right name, I don't even know. This person was sort of spearheading this stuff, and then after 2002, or maybe even the 2002 paper I have listed up here, then it sort of disappeared. So I don't think there's a lot of good quality kind of work that sort of continued on.
Yeah.
It's all about theory and hand waving in lower quality journals.
So what does it mean for us? It's an opportunity, or
If we're willing to put in the work, I actually think we can make a big contribution.
yeah.
I was thinking about the question Justin asked, how we can combine our two little groups work together. I think what Justin showed here, the theoretical framework is a very good start. I wish I have read this before I start coding. So this will give us a comprehensive coding scheme. And if we have multiple coders using the same coding scheme and go back to read the comments again, then we have a common base, and then we compare notes, compare codes, and maybe we can come up and another theory specifically focusing on complaining global virtual team. And then we have quantitative to back up how I use PLS, for example, how to predict different types of complaining behaviors and how these different types of complaining behaviors will influence team dynamics. This is one way I think maybe worth pursuing in the future. This could be something new in terms of theory and also the context.
So to me, if we are going to code, at least to have some kind of a theoretical backing or grounding or something, what's in the blue box, excuse me, I think would be a good foundation, or good enough for now, or something. Right? Yeah.
And which not only give us a structure, but also give us specific definition of each construct. So for each coder, so there's a high chance we can get a better internal reliability, internal reader reliability.
Yeah, and I think fine-tuning these categorical definitions, and then maybe having all of us as a group go through the process that Longzhu already did alone, just as we simultaneously look at a comment and say, okay, here's how we break it down. This is why it goes in this category, and have that discussion, over several dozen comments until we kind of start to develop a common understanding of what we're looking at might be a useful next step.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming we're all going to be doing the coding. But it seems like it's a little bit of a, we're repeating all that work that the students did before. I don't know if we feel comfortable with that work. It doesn't have as fine-grained of categories as this.
Bob, so as we discussed before, so if you think this is something that needs to be done, we can involve our graduate students and coaches. So I may be able to sort of organize a team, as long as we give them clear instructions, coding scheme, we may be able to get some, grad students do it for us, so we don't have to do it ourselves.
So it still might be useful for us to do it.
Well, it would be necessary to develop the coding scheme understanding. So obviously, and then one of the problems always with the use of graduate students is that in many cases, the work they do is not good quality. Especially if it's paid hired help. So sometimes it's just cheaper to do it yourself. But in any case, if it's a relatively simple, reliable sort of task that can be completed by someone with minimal training, then yes, we may even be able to find some help, so we don't have to do it ourselves.
And I have several graduate students, graduate assistants that could help with the project as well. They have extra time. So.
I agree that hiring. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Lanju, you first.
I mean, just quick. I agree that hiring students do that will be a time saving way, but I also suggest that we at least have, I mean, at least 3 or 4 people from us should code the comments as well, because I think as we reading the comments, there might be new stories coming up, and if we have a scheme made scheme for students, they may miss that, and that's the most valuable part. That's our contribution, something out of the framework Justin showed us, something new from GPT.
But also, yeah, like you were saying, Lanju, probably the marriage of both of them, and that might come from us working through the comments a little bit, because let's say being constructive or instrumental, well, what does that mean in the context of global virtual teams, for example? Like, I don't know. So
Right.
Totally agree.
And there were some other issues we didn't bring up. Like, I don't know, Longju, did you see any complaining about language issues?
I didn't see that, but time zone differences, they are complaining about that. Cultures.
Culture. Did they complain about culture?
They complained this is constructive complaint. They talk about, well, it was cultural differences did make a challenge in the team, but then they figured out through discussion and talking.
Yeah, I agree. I think we can learn a lot, even though it seems like it could be very tedious, but I think we could learn a lot by actually doing the coding ourselves.
And I would suggest using NVivo instead of Excel. It's much easier.
Great.
So what are next steps?
Yeah, what are the next steps then? Yes. I mean, so do we want to spend another week sort of looking at some things before we move on to the next task, or do you want to start looking at the specific topics and papers?
Do we decide to focus, I mean, to work on this study, or I'm not sure. If we decide on this, then I have some specific ideas. If we still looking for other ideas, topics,
I'm not sure if we want to have more topics. It seems to me like now we have enough ideas. The challenge is selecting the one or a couple and pursuing them, at least for now.
Are we
I
going to
wonder
try
if we should wait for Stefan to listen to the rest of this recording,
Yeah,
because
maybe.
he's, I guess this was his brainchild, maybe, I don't know.
I think too, we might, I mean, one way to proceed would be to focus on developing an actual research model with the constructs that we're interested in and some initial hypotheses of how they relate to each other, and then figure out from that what data we need to support that, and go from there. The other thing is kind of the reverse model, which we often do in these groups, which is we're pouring in all kinds of data and then trying to see which constructs kind of coalesce for us, and then which relationships among those constructs seem to be the most interesting and promising. So we're still kind of in that stage, but I don't know. I mean, we can go either direction.
But Bob, did your comment imply then that we're going to try and merge both the quantitative data we have, let's say personality variables and whatever, to predict and or be predicted by our coding of complaining comments?
Well, I think definitely that's the way to go. Yeah.
Okay.
But just in terms of helping us structure the qualitative data, we can take a more emergent approach where we kind of dig into the data and start coding, but then leave it open for, as we get more impressions of what those comments really are all about, that maybe we fine tune the categories more, maybe we add more categories, maybe we come to a different understanding of the process as we actually read the original comments, or we just decide, no, we want to look at this, say, constructive comments versus holding someone to account comments, or cathartic release comments, and we already have an understanding. These are the kinds of comments we're looking for. And then it's just putting those comments into those boxes and then tying it into all the other data.
There's actually not going to be that many categories that we can take from this blue box, right? So like, for example, the icebreaker comment, it would be very, I don't even see absurd for someone in an X culture project to type in on a survey
Right.
some kind of comment to break the ice with an administrator or
Yeah.
something. Like, it wouldn't make sense. So
It's not the audience. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the concern that, yes, so we have not only different types of complaining, but also different channels of complaining. And so what's going on between the two students may be different from what's going on between
Exactly.
the student and the weekly survey, or between the
Exactly.
student and the professor, or the student and the coach. So all of those are obviously very different.
That does bring up an interesting point too, just about the psychology of the students that are typing in the comments. Like, who do they think they're commenting to? And what do they expect is going to happen based on this comment? Do they think they're going to be evaluated? I think a lot of them are thinking they might be evaluated on the basis of their answers and their comments and everything. Others maybe are expecting that they can affect some kind of change through the process by issuing this complaint. Others maybe are just the cathartic release of just, okay, getting this out. Like, I just am going to tell somebody whether anybody pays attention to it or not. But we can't, and that's impossible to tell. We can't get into their psychological state as they're typing their comment.
But from the comments, I think what you said is exactly true. There's some comments the students mentioned specifically. They wrote a long paragraph and then specifically who did what in last week and how things changed in this week and then what we are going to do next week and who were not participating and in the beginning and then who came back. Very specific names and working hours and sections. And other teams, they just talk about their emotional state or just one or two sentences. I feel like some people did try to change the things going on in the team by writing these comments, but others they just express their dissatisfaction.
I don't know. I mean, Justin's categories here or Kowalski's categories seem useful. Like, I think we can, like those long detailed ones, that almost to me seems like it could be a self-promotion, self-defense kind of thing. Like someone who takes all that time to say, look, these people are doing this, these people are not doing this, kind of infers that, oh, I'm doing a lot,
do you want that to be the next step, right? For us to maybe go over the same comments that Long Ju did, for example, and see if we can find some of these and maybe add a couple other categories.
Perhaps,
I think that could be helpful. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's plan then to do that until then, by the next week, and then have a firm goal next week to then, finalize or decide on which paper we want to pursue, or papers. There may be multiple teams, and then go from there.
Okay,
Is
so
that something
what I will do then, no, go ahead, Bob.
Well, I was just gonna say, is that something we can kind of all do independently, or should we have a more structured way of approaching that? Like, in other words, like, I haven't used the software Long Ju is referring to. I mean, I could learn how to do it and do what he did and just try to, basically do what he did on my own, or should we have it more like, okay, here's the task that we're all going to do?
Some structure might be helpful, but are we ready to sort of structure it in a way? I mean, like, is it a clear, is it clear what we need to do, or are we still searching?
Well, I think what would add clarity is if perhaps, at least for some of these, I put a definition, right? I'll go back to the paper and write how they defined it or use the term, because maybe just one or two words won't be that clear.
And maybe you could work with Longzhu to do that based on what he did already. And then we can kind of combine those two into a more comprehensive structure that then the rest of us then can use that as a template and independently go back through a certain number of comments. I don't know if we want to all go through the same comments or if we chop those up, each of us take a different 500.
I think that the way that I've done qualitative reviews with my students in the past was that we would divide it up and we would have a second. So there would always be two people on every set of qualitative pieces. It's not that, I think the goal right now is to identify the keywords for NVivo, right? What are the keywords that may be used? We need to think from a cultural framework where the person is from, because they're writing in English, but as we know, the English isn't always perfect. So we saw earlier in today's conversation, someone writing that someone wasn't independent, but probably the word independent wasn't meant to be independent. It was probably not contributing. So we have to put on our own cultural hats, linguistic hats as well.
My big worry is that I've been working enough on this qualitative side or study. And so to me, I'm afraid of it. I mean, to me, it almost looks like a black hole. So it's been several years, and every time we start getting into coding data or reading comments, it becomes a huge task, and then somehow it goes nowhere. So my only suggestion here is that it's a good idea to take a look at the comments, but I almost encourage you not to get into a full-scale qualitative study, at least not yet, until we decide that that's the study we want to do, because it can easily consume weeks and weeks of time. And I'm not sure if it's really necessary for the quantitative studies that we plan to do. A quick look just to get a sense of what kind of comments we're dealing with, absolutely yes. But a full-scale coding effort with multiple coders, with double coding, I don't think that's necessary, at least not if we wanted to simply figure out what are the types of complaining. So because it can be a momentous, big task that will require a lot of, tens, if not hundreds of hours of work. And I'm just not sure if it will be marginally useful.
I'm not suggesting coding yet whatsoever. It was more of do our eyes capture the same kind of ideas?
Yes, yeah, sure. Then yes, in that case, yeah, just a quick review. That's perfectly fine. Yeah, but before, but not getting into the full scale with, formal coding schemes, helpers, unless that's the study we want to do as a separate study.
Yeah.
So in the next few days, this is what I'll sort of volunteer to do. Maybe I'll volunteer Longzhu too, is that maybe the two of us meet to sort of beef up or sort of crystallize some of these categories. Then after that, I'm maybe more or less like Bob. I don't need to speak for Bob. I don't know what's involved. So I'd love to learn, but I'm not sure that that's going to be particularly helpful.
That's a good idea.
Vivo. So yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
Okay, yeah, works for me too.
Yeah.
Then so the two of you will sort of meet next. Is there anything that we all need to be doing, or for now we just wait for a little while, other than maybe reading the comments more attentively and just to get a sense of what's going on?
I would even suggest you save your time, do some other work. And then when Longzhu and I, and then maybe with your feedback, sort of finalize the categories, then you can spend hardcore time coding things.
Okay.
I don't know if the coding is the right word. I'm not trying to be provocative.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, exploration of the content.
Yeah, whatever.
That's such a provocateur.
I know. You're just in a field that I don't know at all. I'm trying to help, but on the margin. That's it, right?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that sounds like a plan then. So then I guess till next week, right?
Yeah.
All right.
And I promise that if we sort of move from a kind of a qualitative thing to more of a coded quantitative thing, I I assure you that I'll pick up my weight. But if you move into qualitative, it's just not my strong suit.
Right. Well, in this case, it almost looks like qualitative is more of a support function, so it's not our main research methodology, at least not for the papers we've discussed so far. So I guess we don't really need to do it, at that proper level. So at least not for now. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, then till next week. So same time then.
Sounds good.
Sure, I'm okay, whatever. Yeah.
Happy 4th of July for those who observe
Yeah, enjoy.
or not.
Oh, that's in
Thank
a
you.
couple of days, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
Longju,
everyone.
we'll just make a meeting and we'll do next steps on our own.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sounds very good. Bye-bye.
Thank
All
you
right,
for
great.
volunteering.
Bye.
For me.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for volunteering.
No problem.
All right. Yeah. Anytime. Anytime.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, Vas, do you have? No.
I guess he's gone. Okay, so when do you want to meet? Maybe that's good that everyone else left.
Um,
Do you have a preference? And then I'm sorry for volunteering you, but you're the only other person that
No,
looked
no,
like
no,
did any work. That's all. My team fell apart and they we're recording. I have to watch. Stop recording. Stop.
that's good complaining.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so when do you want to meet? They can listen to us scheduling.
You're still here because I needed to step away.
Can you
so I switched to my
stop the
phone, but yeah.
recording?
Yes, stop
Stop the
recording.
recording.
Yes.